There are stories in the military that refuse to die. They are whispered in mess halls, shared around campfires in training grounds, and debated on internet forums. Some time ago, on this channel, I shared the legend of the Kandahar Giant, the story of a special forces team that encountered a biblical monster in the mountains of Afghanistan. That video told you the legend, the version that leaked out to the public, the version that sounded like a myth. But legends are often just blurry reflections of the truth. Last month, I received a package. No return address, just a flash drive containing a series of audio logs and a redacted after-action report from 2002. The man who sent it claims he was there. He claims that the story you know is only half the truth. He says the giant wasn't just a monster living in a cave. He says it was guarding something. And the team that went missing? They didn't just disappear. They were harvested. Forget what you think you know. Forget the rumors. This is the raw, unfiltered account of Operation High Keep. This is how we woke up something that should have stayed asleep. Location: Kandahar Province, Northeastern Mountain Range. Date: August 2002. Unit: Task Force Dagger. Team Spectre. My name is, well, let's just stick to my call sign, Spectre 2-1. Back in 2002, Afghanistan was the Wild West. We were still figuring out the terrain, still figuring out the enemy. But we thought we knew what we were fighting. We thought we were fighting men with AK-47s and ideology. We were wrong. The mission started like any other standard extraction. A patrol unit, call sign Murph, had gone dark in a rugged sector of the mountains, close to the Pakistan border. This area was a jagged scar on the face of the earth. High altitude, endless caves, and goat paths that hadn't changed since Alexander the Great marched his armies through it here to their doom. Murph's team was a recon element. 4 men, good soldiers, experienced. They had checked in at 0800 hours to report a strange structure near a cave entrance. That was their last transmission. After that, silence. But not total silence. Our comms officer, a kid we called Patch, picked up intermittent bursts of static on their frequency. It wasn't speech. It wasn't Morse code. It sounded like screaming, but it was distorted, slowed down, like the batteries in their radios were dying, or like time itself was moving slower where they were. Command authorized a QRF, Quick Reaction Force. That was us. Team Spectre. 8 men loaded into 2 MH-47 Chinook helicopters. We were heavy. We carried M4 carbines with under-barrel grenade launchers, saws, squad automatic weapons, and enough ammo to start a small war. I remember sitting on the ramp of the bird, watching the landscape roll by beneath my boots. The mountains looked like teeth, sharp, gray, unforgiving teeth waiting to chew us up. My team leader, Chief, tapped my helmet. I couldn't hear him over the roar of the rotors, but I saw his hand signals. 5 minutes out, lock and load. I had a bad feeling in my gut. You get that sometimes. It's a primal instinct, something left over from when our ancestors were hunted by saber-toothed tigers. The air felt heavy. The sky was a weird shade of pale, sickly blue. We weren't landing in a hot zone. There was no enemy fire, no RPGs, just the mountain waiting for us. As the pilots flared the Chinook for landing, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and rocks, I looked out at the landing zone. It was a plateau, halfway up a sheer cliff, and right in the middle of the plateau, I saw the first sign that this wasn't a normal extraction. It was the equipment of the lost patrol. Their rucksacks, their radios, their helmets. They were lying in a neat pile in the center of the clearing, not scattered during a fight, piled up, like an offering. We ran off the ramp, weapons raised, scanning the high ground. The bird lifted off, leaving us in the sudden crushing silence of the valley. Spectre actual to Murph, Chief whispered into the comms. Come in. Over. Silence. Check the gear, Chief ordered, pointing at the pile. I moved forward, my boots crunching on the loose shale. I reached the pile of equipment. I picked up a helmet. It was dented, not by a bullet and not by a rock. It looked like it had been squeezed, like a soda can crushed in a giant vise. And then I saw the blood. It wasn't splashed on the ground. It was painted on the rocks in symbols I had never seen before. Chief, I said, my voice shaking despite my training. "You need to see this." We were alone. We were miles from support, and we had just walked into the dining room of something very, very hungry. We moved out in a standard wedge formation, keeping 5-meter spacing. We were professionals. We had trained for every scenario: ambush, IEDs, hostage rescue. But you can't train for the feeling of being watched by the mountains themselves. The first thing I noticed was the silence. If you've ever been in nature, you know it's never truly quiet. There are always birds, crickets, the rustle of dry grass. But this valley? It was dead. I don't mean empty, I mean dead. There were no goats grazing on the cliffs, no hawks circling in the sky. Even the wind seemed afraid to make a noise here. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Check your sectors," Chief whispered over the comms. "Stay sharp. I don't like this quite." "Copy that," I replied, scanning the ridgeline with my ACOG scope. We found the path leading up to the cave entrance. It wasn't a natural trail. It was worn smooth into the rock, like it had been used for thousands of years. But the steps were weird. They were too far apart. To climb them, a normal human had to take a massive lunge. Whoever, or whatever, made these stairs had a stride twice as long as a man. "Look at the rocks," Miller, our heavy weapons guy, pointed out. I looked. On either side of the path, there were small piles of stones, cans. But as we got closer, I realized they weren't just stones. They were marking a boundary. "Do not cross," our interpreter muttered. He was a local Afghan we had brought with us. He was shaking, clutching his prayer beads so hard his knuckles were white. "This is bad place. Jinns live here. Old giants." "Stow it," Chief snapped. "We're here for Americans, not fairy tales." But I saw the fear in Chief's eyes too. We all felt it, a static charge in the air that made the hair on your arms stand up. The closer we got to the cave mouth, the heavier our legs felt. It was like wading through invisible water. About 300 meters from the cave entrance, the terrain changed. The gray slate of the mountain disappeared under a layer of white. At first, I thought it was snow, or maybe quartz. Then I stepped on it. Crunch. It wasn't snow, it was bone. Thousands of them. It was a literal field of bones stretching all the way to the darkness of the cave. We were walking on a carpet of death. "Hold fire," Chief signaled. "Watch your step." I looked down at the debris. It wasn't just goat bones. I saw human femurs, shattered rib cages, skulls that had been crushed flat, but mixed in with the biological waste, there was history. I kicked aside a pile of ribs and saw something metallic glinting in the sun. I knelt down to inspect it. It was a rusted receiver of an AK-74. Next to it, a tattered piece of a tactical vest. It wasn't American gear, it was Soviet. "Spetsnaz," I whispered. "From the 80s. The Russians had been here. They had tried to take this mountain 20 years ago." "Over here," Miller called out. We moved to his position. He was standing over a large boulder. Embedded in the rock was a heavy machine gun, a DS-HK. The barrel was bent. Not bent like it hit the ground, bent like someone had grabbed the steel barrel with a bare hand and twisted it into a knot. "What could do that to hardened steel?" Miller asked, his voice low. "Nothing human," I said, standing up and looking toward the cave. The entrance was huge, a gaping maw in the cliff face, easily 15 feet high, and right in front of it, stuck on a pike, was a helmet. An American Kevlar helmet. It belonged to the patrol we were looking for. It was a warning, or an invitation. "Safety's off," Chief ordered. "We're going in." We stopped at the threshold. The sunlight didn't seem to reach past the entrance of the cave. It was like a physical barrier between the world of the living and whatever this was. But before we saw anything, the smell hit us. It wasn't just the smell of rotting corpses. We were soldiers. We knew that smell. This was different. It was a thick, musky stench, like wet dog, copper, and sulfur mixed with old, stagnant blood. It tasted metallic in the back of your throat. "Masks up," Chief ordered, his voice muffled. We pulled our neck gaiters over our noses, but it didn't help. The smell seemed to seep through the fabric. Our interpreter, Ahmed stopped dead in his tracks. He dropped to his knees in the bone field, refusing to take another step. "No," he whispered, shaking his head violently. "Ifrit, the devourer. I do not go in." Chief looked at him, then at us. "Leave him. Miller, watch our six. If he runs, let him go. We move." We stepped into the shadow. "Lights out. Go green," I whispered. One by one, we flipped our nods, night vision devices, down. The world turned into a grainy, green phosphor haze. The cave wasn't natural. The walls were smooth, too smooth. They looked like they had been carved out of the mountain by giant chisels, and the size? The ceiling was at least 30 feet high. "Check the floor," I called out softly. The floor was covered in dust, inches thick, but there were tracks in it, massive, barefoot prints. They were humanoid, but they had 6 toes, and the stride, the distance between steps was nearly 5 feet. "Whatever made these prints," I muttered to Chief, "weighs 1,000 pounds." We moved deeper. The temperature dropped. The air grew heavy and damp. We were walking into the belly of the beast. We were about 100 meters inside when we heard it. "Psst! Kirsch! Help! Psst!" It was a radio squelch. "Hold!" Chief signaled. "Identify source." We swept our rifles left and right, green laser designators cutting through the dust motes. The sound was coming from ahead, echoing off the high walls. "It's Murph's radio," I said. "It's transmitting." We pushed forward, moving tactically, heel to toe. The tunnel opened up into a massive cavern. It was like a cathedral of rock. "Over there," Miller pointed his laser at the far wall. I followed the beam. My heart skipped a beat. There, embedded in the rock wall, was the radio handset. It wasn't lying on the ground. It was jammed into a crack in the stone, but it was 12 feet off the ground. "How the hell did it get up there?" Miller whispered. "Did they throw it?" "No," I said, walking closer. "Look at the rock around it." I shone my IR, infrared, illuminator on the wall. There were scratches around the radio, claw marks. Something, had stood there and casually pushed the radio into the stone like it was putting a toy on a high shelf. Suddenly, the smell intensified. A gust of hot, rancid air blew from the back of the cavern, and then a sound. Grind, snap. It sounded like heavy rocks being crushed together. It came from the darkness beyond the radio. I looked up, high up. Near the ceiling of the cavern, there was a ledge. Through my night vision goggles, I saw a heat signature. It was huge. It was crouching on the ledge like a gargoyle. "Contact front!" I screamed. "High! 12 o'clock high!" The thing stood up. It unfolded itself. It just kept going up and up. Even in the dark, I could see the massive silhouette against the faint light coming from deeper in the tunnels. It held something in its hand, a spear, a club, and then 2 eyes reflected the IR light from our goggles. They glowed a fierce, double-tap red. It let out a roar that shook the dust from the ceiling. It wasn't a scream. It was a challenge. The creature didn't climb down. It jumped. From a height of 30 feet, it landed on the stone floor with the weight of a truck. Boom! The impact shook the ground so hard I almost lost my footing. Dust billowed up like a smoke grenade. "Lights! White lights!" Chief screamed. "Burn it!" We switched from night vision to high-intensity tactical flashlights. 6 beams of blinding white light cut through the dust and locked onto the target. And then we saw it. It stood up, towering over us. It had to be at least 12, maybe 15 feet tall. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. Its chest was a barrel of thick, pale muscle covered in scars and filth. But the hair, that was the thing you couldn't look away from. It had a mane of bright, fiery red hair. It was matted and greasy, hanging down its back like a cape. It took a step toward us. The smell became unbearable, like opening a grave that had been baking in the sun. "Back up! Back up!" I yelled, raising my rifle. The giant stopped. It looked at us with eyes that were too far apart. It bared its teeth in a snarl. And that's when I froze. It didn't just have teeth. It had rows of them. An inner set and an outer set, grinding together like a shark's. In its right hand, it held a weapon. It was a crude spear made from the rusted barrel of that twisted Soviet tank gun, sharpened to a point. "Spectre 2-1, take the shot," Chief ordered. "Drop it." But before I could squeeze the trigger, the giant moved. For something that size, it was impossibly fast. It covered the 20 feet between us in 2 strides. It swung the metal spear. "Miller, move!" Miller tried to dive, but the makeshift weapon caught him in the shoulder. The sound was sickening. Wet crunching bone and tearing Kevlar. Miller was thrown across the cavern like a rag doll. He hit the far wall and didn't get up. The giant roared again, spit and blood flying from its mouth. It wasn't scared of us. It was offended that we were in its home. "Open fire! Light him up!" The cavern exploded with noise. 5 M4 carbines and a SAW squad automatic weapon opened up at point-blank range. Rat, tat, 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 tat. The muzzle flashes were like strobe lights in a disco from hell. Every round hit. We were trained operators. We didn't miss. I put a full magazine into the creature's chest. I saw the impacts. I saw the flesh ripple. But he didn't fall. The 5.56 mm rounds were just punching into the thick muscle and fat, getting stuck there. It was like shooting a grizzly bear with a BB gun. He flinched. He grunted. But he didn't stop. "Headshots! Go for the head!" Chief screamed over the roar of gunfire. I reloaded, my hands shaking, and aimed for that red mane. The giant shielded its face with a massive forearm. The bullet sparked off something on its arm. Ancient bronze vambraces, embedded into its skin. It lunged again. This time, it grabbed the closest operator. Tex. Tex was a big guy, 220 pounds of muscle. The giant lifted him off the ground with one hand, grabbing him by the tactical vest. It brought Tex close to its face. "Shoot it! Shoot it!" Tex screamed, dangling in the air, hammering his pistol against the giant's fingers. The giant squeezed. We heard the ribs crack over the sound of the gunfire. Then, with a casual flick of its wrist, it tossed Tex aside. "Grenade!" I yelled. "Use the 40 mic. I activated the M203 grenade launcher attached to my rifle. I didn't have time to aim properly. I just pointed at the center of that massive chest. Thump! The grenade flew across the short distance. Boom! The explosion engulfed the giant's torso. It staggered back, finally losing its balance. Shrapnel and fire tore into its skin. It let out a sound that wasn't a roar. It was a high-pitched shriek of pain. It fell to one knee. Black blood oozed from a crater in its chest. "Reloading!" I shouted. "Hit him again! Don't let him get up!" But as the smoke cleared, the giant looked up. Its eyes were burning with pure hate. It reached down, grabbed a rock the size of a microwave, and hurled it at us. We scattered. The rock smashed into the spot where Chief had been standing a second ago. "Fall back," Chief ordered. "To the entrance! Create distance!" We were retreating. The apex predators of the modern military were running from a myth. We were backed into a corner near the cave entrance. The giant was hurt, bleeding black ichor from the grenade wound, but it was still coming. It moved with a limping, furious gait, dragging the heavy spear. "Aim for the face!" Chief screamed, his voice raw. "Everybody! On my mark! 3, 2, 1, execute!" 4 rifles turned into a single wall of lead. We didn't just shoot, we poured fire. We aimed for the eyes, the mouth, the nose. Anything soft. The giant roared, raising its hands to block the hail of bullets, but it was too much. The rounds chewed through its fingers. They smashed into its jaw. One round, maybe it was mine, maybe it was Chief's, punched through the giant's left eye socket. The creature stiffened. It stood there for a second, swaying like a falling tree. Then, it crashed forward. Thud. The ground shook one last time. The giant lay face down in the dirt, twitching. Silence. "Check fire!" Chief panted. "Check fire!" I lowered my weapon, my barrel smoking. We stood there, staring at the monstrosity. It looked even bigger lying down. It was easily 12 feet long. It smelled like ancient earth and copper. "Check on Miller and Tex," Chief ordered. But before we could move, a sound cut through the air. Whoop, 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 whoop. It wasn't our extraction Chinooks. The rhythm was different, heavier. A massive MH-47G Chinook appeared over the ridge, but this one had no markings. It was painted matte black, no tail numbers, no flags. It didn't land. It hovered directly over the plateau. A fast rope dropped, and men in unmarked grey tactical gear slid down. They moved differently than us. Cold, mechanical. They didn't run to check our wounded. They ran straight to the giant. "Secure the perimeter," one of them shouted. He wasn't talking to us. He was talking to his team. "Package acquired. Prepare for sling load." "Who the hell are you?" Chief yelled, stepping forward. "My men are bleeding out." The leader of the grey team turned. He wore a black visor that covered his face. "Stand down, Sergeant. This is now a classified recovery operation. Step away from the biological asset." They threw a massive cargo net over the giant's body. 4 of them struggled to roll the creature over. It must have weighed 1,100 pounds. As they rolled it, I saw its face one last time. Even in death, with half its head gone, it looked regal, like a fallen king from a time before history. The Chinook lowered a hook. They attached the net. As the helicopter lifted off, the giant's body swung in the air, a grotesque trophy hanging against the setting Afghan sun. They took the body. They took the spear. They even swept the dirt where the blood had pooled. Only then did our medevac arrive. The debriefing wasn't a debriefing. It was a threat. They flew us to a base in Oman, separate rooms. No contact with the outside world for 2 weeks. A man in a suit sat across from me. He pushed a piece of paper across the metal table. It was an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. "Sign it," he said. "What about Miller?" I asked. "What about Tex?" "Sergeant Miller and Specialist Tex died in a rock slide during a combat patrol," the man said, his voice flat. "Tragic accident. Their families will be taken care of, assuming you sign this paper." "And the giant?" I asked. "What was that thing?" The man paused. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, respect. "The location you entered is very old, Sergeant. It is mentioned in texts that were written before the Bible. Some things are not meant to be woken up." He stood up and gathered his files. "You didn't see a giant. You saw a bear. A very large cave bear. The altitude caused hallucinations. That is your story. Stick to it." I signed the paper. I served 4 more years, but I never went back to the mountains. Miller and Tex are buried in Arlington. Their tombstones say, "Killed in action." But they don't say what action. They don't say they were killed by a creature that shouldn't exist. I'm an old man now. I don't care about the NDA anymore. The world needs to know. There are things sleeping in the hollow places of the earth. We call them monsters. The ancients called them Nephilim. And we just poked the hornet's nest. This is Captain Nightwhisper. If you are ever in the mountains of Kandahar and you smell rotting meat and sulfur, don't investigate. Just run. Out.